Hello, farmers. Why farmers? Well, today I wanted to talk to you guys about Farmageddon. This is something I've wanted to do for quite some time, and I've just lacked the time to do it. The Farmageddon Farm Fresh edition is nearing development, and I was hoping to make a video to talk a little bit about it and see if we can interest a few of you folks to try out the print and play before we send it to print. So in this video, I'm going to cover three things. The first thing is I'm going to basically explain how to play Farmageddon. It'll be a really quick run through, not a rules explanation, just sort of a quick gist of how the game is played. The second part, I want to talk about what the changes are between the Farmageddon that Fifth Street Games published a couple years ago, back in 2012, and the Farm Fresh edition, so you could sort of see the big difference between that. And then the third section, I'm going to go over all of the farmer cards to show all the different combos and how cool they are. So let's jump right in. So basically at the start of the game, you have two types of decks. You have the crop deck, which you shuffle. You have the farmer deck, which you shuffle. You give every player 3 crop cards and 4 farmer cards. Then you can sort of just check out the reference card that looks horrible in my version, but that's what we have. So the game plays with 2 to 4 players in a half hour, and it's 106 cards total. There will be 2 promo cards, so 108, but it's 106 in the box. That 30-minute is really an upwards limit. That's usually for new players, but with 2 players and experienced players, it's anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes, which I really like. So every turn, you are going to follow the same thing. The game is played in turns. There's no rounds. You just go around clockwise. So on your turn, you draw 2 crop cards. You can then take actions. You can plant as much as you want. You can fertilize as much as what you want, but you have to do it at least once, and I'll explain why. And then you could take up to 2 farmer actions in any order. And you could do those things in any order. You can plant, then do a farmer action, then you can fertilize, then do a farmer action, then you can plant again, however you want. Once you're done doing those things, at the end of your turn, you get to draw 1 farmer card. So you're always going to have farmer cards and you're always going to have crop cards on your turn. You'll never just have a dead turn where you can't do anything. Then you're going to harvest any of the crops that you can harvest, and then you're going to discard down to 6 crop cards. So let me go into now specifically how a turn works. The game is really built around planting crops. This is how you make most of your points, or money, which you see here. This is a sluggo corn. I should note that while the illustrations on some of these cards are final, some of them are not, like this sluggo is being replaced. The graphic design here is completely placeholder. It looks much better now. It's been done by Adam McIver, the same guy who did Hocus, but this is just my placeholder prototype. So the game is really built around planting crops. You win by having the most valuable points, most valuable harvest at the end, which the primary way you do that is by planting and harvesting crops. So every crop on the top has a fertilizer amount, and that's how many fertilizer it requires before you can harvest it. So sluggo is 2, and it has a money value, which is how much it's worth when you harvest it. So if I put 2 fertilizer on here, I can harvest it, and it's worth 7 points. So in a typical turn, remember, I would draw my 2 cards and then I can plant. So let's say I plant this. I plant it face up in front of me. I've now planted that. I can plant as much as I want. I then can fertilize it if I want. So the cool thing is any crop card can be used as fertilizer. So I could take this sassy wheat and I could place it face down to fertilize. And I could place this jazzy coffee bean and place it face down. So this is now fully fertilized. However, I cannot harvest things on the same turn they are planted. So this will auto harvest at the end of my turn on a turn that it was not the same turn it was planted. So that means that my opponents have to take their turns, and if this is still around when it gets to me, I will harvest it. So that means I discard these 2 cards and I put this in my score pile. Now, the choice really comes down to choosing what you want to plant and what you want to use as fertilizer. So there's that hand management going on. For example, this jazzy coffee bean, if I place it, due to the fact that it's a Frankencrop and it has a bonus, I get to draw a farmer card when I plant it. So I probably wouldn't use that as fertilizer because it lets me draw a farmer card, which gives me more options. Now the farmer cards, you get to play up to 2 of these on your turn. There are 12 unique ones. They're all very distinct. They all have very different gameplay, and they combo in really cool ways. The really neat thing about Farmageddon is that you can only do 2 of them on your turn, which means that you can't just blast cards out like you can in a game like Munchkin. You have to choose what you need, who to target, and what will improve yourself the most. So you're basically choosing what to plant, what to use as fertilizer, what actions to use, and whom to target, whom to, benefit. And then you're going to score the most points. The game ends when the crop deck runs out. and then everyone gets one final turn, and you basically harvest what's left, and that's it. So Farmageddon is a card game. It is a card game all about hand management. It has some light strategy. It has a little bit of take that. The way I like to describe it is it's sort of like a CCG for goofy people. And the reason I call it that is that a CCG like Magic the Gathering or Netrunner, it has that awesome moment where your combo works, where you really surprise your opponents, where you really feel clever because of how you played your cards, the path you saw, and how you really used your cards to go to victory. And I think Farmageddon does that really well. The reason I call it for goofy people is that there's no CCG element, there's no collectible element, you're not building a deck, you're using the cards that you draw from the deck and you're trying to maximize your options. But there's 12 unique farmer cards, and then there's 11 unique Frankencrops, and so that means there's 23 cards that have all sorts of connections with each other, and it's really fun for people to explore and discover those combos. So that's effectively what the game is. Now, what did we change for the Farm Fresh edition? Looking back at it, what Farmageddon was from 2012 until now, that's 3 or 4 years of a lot of people playing the game, giving feedback, asking questions. First and foremost, I wanted to just fundamentally improve the text on the cards. When you have a game that's got, as I said, 23 unique cards, that text just needs to be better. And, I've been working on design for 4 or 5 years more since I published Farmageddon. And so I'm just a better designer now. And so I use things like key terms and just eliminated a ton of loopholes. There used to be all these little questions that people would have that you could reasonably infer or make an assumption on how the card worked, but players shouldn't have to do that. The cards should just be self-explanatory. And so I wanted to eliminate all those little edge cases, all those weird confusing things of, well, what in this one weird case when I play this card was that? And every time those have popped up, we've tested extensively to make sure that those don't happen. And we haven't found any for a month or so now, but for a while there, about every week or two, somebody would find a really weird combo that would lead to a really strange question, and I would make sure to improve the wording so that it was not in question and it was completely fine. So cleaner text, improving the edge cases. I wanted to make it a better two-player experience. The old game was sort of tacked on as a two-player game. It had quite a few custom rules and weird things, and now all the rules are same between them with one minor exception, which is that you reduce the size of the deck in two-player just so that it doesn't overstay its welcome, and it adds a little bit more variance between it. But other than that, two-player now is a much tighter, more interesting game. Two-player previously used to either be a huge blowout or it'd be really, really tight. And now it's not a blowout nearly as often unless somebody's just playing terribly. And it's more often a much tighter, more competitive experience, which I think is really important for couples to be able to buy this game, roommates to be able to buy this game and have a really good time with it. My nose is super itchy. I'm sorry. I'm not on drugs. Another thing I wanted to fix is that previously the game had planting fields, which is that there were 3 fields that were shared between all players, and when you placed a crop on it, you had that field until it was cleared or somebody killed it. And for a while, this version had those, and we tested without it, and it just opened up the game in huge ways. Previously, it was completely possible for someone to just have really bad card draw and for opponents to play very aggressively, and someone just would not be able to plant. They would spend 2, 3, 4, 5 turns in a row being able to do nothing, and I think that is horrible game experience. So this fixed that. There was also sort of an idea that having the fields had this sort of area control element, but in hindsight, it felt like something, but it really wasn't a very meaningful element to the game. So it was one of those things that was it was purporting itself to be a sort of a strategic layer, but it really wasn't. And again, there's that frustration that was countering the strategic element it added. The other thing is I always liked the idea of having a sort of low value crop strategy. So for example, here these are worth $5, $4, and $7. In the previous version of the game with the fields, because the fields were so rare, if you didn't have at least 1 or 2 wary squash, you were not going to win. Now, the other day I won without a single crop that was worth more than $8 because I was planting a diverse, wide portfolio, and I was using lots of bonuses to build them all up. And so the game is opened up, it's more strategic, it's deeper, it's less frustrating. It's also simpler. There's no more fields in the middle. And by getting those 3 cards out of the pool, I was able to add a reference card, which people have always asked for, and the 2 promo cards. So overall, I'm very excited about that change. Finally, overall, I just wanted to add a little bit more skill and more interesting decisions to the game. And in the next section, when I go through each card, you'll maybe see some of this. But some of the cards had like sort of an obvious, like, oh, this one's so obvious to play. And so I tried to make it so that they had more of a cost, or you had to sort of figure out how to use them a little bit more. The other thing is I wanted to make sure all the cards were distinct. You know, in the past, crop rotation and foreclosure were both theft cards, and I sort of looked at it and said, I don't need 2 theft cards. Why don't I make one card that steals things, but then one card that does something completely different? And so I did that with all the cards. And so again, it's a much more diverse hand. I've rebalanced a lot of this so that there's a little less take that. And so it's just a more strategic, combo heavy game with, you know, better, stronger key terms. Something I can't show you here is that the game now also has completely redone graphic design. There's going to be completely new graphic design with new icons, new card backs, and it'll be easier to learn the game, easier to see what's happening in the game. It'll be more beautiful. Brett Bean has redone the 4 main crops. He also did the new Star Thistle promo card. So I just love the way the new game looks, and I can't wait to share that more. If you're following me on Twitter, you've seen those cards, but I don't have them in this video yet. I still have my old proto. So those are the twists on what's changed. Now let's go into each of the cards. Now I quickly want to go through the farmer cards to sort of give you a glimpse at how they all work. So the first one, we'll just do irrigated land. So irrigated land is very similar to the old bumper crop. When I got rid of, this used to be rented land, which would give you additional fields. And maybe it's a sign that the planting fields weren't a good idea, that I had to add cards to make it less frustrating. So I had this art, I had the room for the card, I wanted to do something new with it. So we took the old bumper crop and made it so that you had to take a little more risk. Previously, you could just drop the bumper card down and just score in the end, and that's less interesting. So now the way irrigated land works is it's worth 3 more bucks. You place it in your score pile with the crop, and you place it on a crop that you planted this turn. So the idea is that now, if it survives, I can harvest this and it's worth 10 bucks instead of 7 bucks. So this is a nice card to make lower value crops more valuable without changing their fertilizer cost. Farm Futures changed a little bit. So this used to be a card that you could draw 2 crop cards, which is still there and is still useful. And it used to let you steal cards from people's hands. But there's all this weird stuff of which cards could you steal? Was it random? And it's also, stealing cards from someone's hand is a bit of a take that cliche. So I got rid of that. And now, again, to support that broader, lower yield strategy, you could score this, which means to put it in your harvest pile, and you get $1 at the end of the game for every unique crop card in your score pile. So if you do a lot of different crops, these things can really add up. And if you get a couple of them, that can be a really good score. So by unique, I mean that Sluggo Corn, Sassy Wheat, and Jazzy Coffee Bean are all unique. So if I had these 3 in my score pile at the end, this is worth 3 bucks. So that is the Farm Futures. So another card to sort of modify value is the pesticides. Farmageddon has sort of an anti-pesticides, you know, organic is good kind of joke vibe happening. So here you just place it on any planted crop and it's worth -5 bucks. So this is a good one to put on a leader or to slow someone down who's got a lot of very expensive crops out. And so you put -5. So that means this takes 2 to fertilize, and it's only worth 2 bucks now. So next, I want to show you another new card that really demonstrates some of the fun new combos. In fact, I'll show you 2 different cards. So the first one is Crop Rotation. This used to be a theft card. Now what it means is you can clear a planted crop you own and didn't plant this turn. So let's say that I planted Sluggo Corn on my last turn, and then Bob put pesticides on it. So now it's only worth 2 bucks. Well, that stinks. So now I can clear it, which means I kill it, so I would get rid of it. And then I can plant a new crop and harvest it this turn. So let's say I now plant a Grumpy Melon, and then I can immediately fertilize it 3 times and harvest it right away. So I had to kill a card to do that, but it let me clear up that pesticides, which is going to be a problem. And it sort of turns something bad into something good. This is also a really good Trojan horse card that you can throw that Sassy Weed out, which people might not target, and then crop rotate it, replace it with a Wary Squash, which is worth 15, and you'll get a lot more points. So I really like crop rotation. Another fun thing you could do to solve pesticides, so let's say there's a pesticides there, is that I could use Darn Gophers. Darn Gophers used to only steal fertilizer, but now it can steal any card on top of the card except a protected card. So I could say, actually, I'm going to Darn Gopher that pesticide off. So I spent a card to get a card, but I can clear that off and then I can harvest it again. Or let's say I really need a certain fertilizer, I could play Darn Gophers and steal that fertilizer to help me out. So Darn Gophers is way more powerful and a lot more flexible now, which makes it a much more interesting card. So another card that is interesting with pesticides, just to show all the examples, I'm trying to look for a wary squash. So let's say I have a wary squash out, and that's worth 15 bucks. But then somebody comes and puts a pesticides on it, so now it's going to take me 4 fertilizer for only 15 bucks. Genetic superworm used to just reduce the fertilizer cost using crop cards, but we realized that it was effectively a less flexible and worse version of Farm Futures, and we didn't want to duplicate that, so we got rid of Farm Futures. And Genetic Superworm now lets you use excess action cards to reduce the cost. So you put the Genetic Superworm on, and for every action card, including this one, you reduce the fertilizer cost by 1. So now the fertilizer cost is only 2. So yeah, you put pesticides on it, but for 2 fertilizer, I get 10 bucks, which is still better than a slug of corn, which is 2 for 7. So again, you can see how you can maybe turn a bad thing into a better thing with Genetic Superworm. And then if you were to throw, say, an irrigated land on it, now it would only take 1 fertilizer, and it's worth 13 bucks for 1 fertilizer. That's fantastic. So that's another nice little series of combos and new cards you can do there. So one of my favorite cards from the previous version that mostly we focused on making just a bit simpler is Foul Manure. Foul Manure is one of my favorite cards because it has both an offensive and defensive value. So you could place this on a card and it's protected. Previously there was a lot of text on it, but now I've introduced the term protected, which basically means you cannot target it with anything good or bad. It's protected. It's off limits. Nothing can mess with it. This means that it's really hard to kill. However, this guy costs 2 more fertilizer. So this now takes 3 fertilizer for 4 bucks. So this would be a terrible crop to Foul Manure on. Now, the old combo is back, which is the Dust Bowl. There's only 3 of these in the deck, and now you have to discard a card to play it. So there's a little bit of cost involved here. So this basically costs 2 farmer cards, but I kill every crop in play. So if my opponents have, the Sluggo and then a Wary Squash, they all die. But then the other thing, which is noted here, is that I kill all planted crops, but then I discard all protection cards on planted crops, which means this Foul Manure goes away. Which means if I plan for it, I can protect my crop, Dust Bowl the protection off, and then harvest it. So that's one of the old combos that's really fun, and we threw in there. So Bumper Crop had to change because we sort of put its role onto the, we put its role onto the irrigated land. And so what we do now is you place this on here and you have to discard a farmer card because it's really powerful. However, what happens is when you harvest the crop, you get all the fertilizer back. So I can use a Bumper Crop, which costs me 2 actions, and I would score this melon, and then I get these 3 fertilizer back to do whatever I want with. So Bumper Crop is a really good way to change your crops, manage your hand, and get a little more bang for your buck. It's a really good hand management card. A card that basically hasn't changed at all is Thresher. This is one of the few cards that just like completely hasn't changed, which is that you kill a crop, it just goes away. However, its owner gets all the fertilizer back. So it stinks, but it's not too bad. But it's a good way to clear that off. These also, are a good way. You could use these on your own to get rid of cards with pesticides. So one thing that's different about this game and the old one is that if cards can be harvested, they must be harvested, which means that you could put pesticides on someone's card. So here it's worth -1, and then you could fertilize it, which means it'll be automatically harvested. So I could use a Thresher to get rid of this. And then I can also combo it to mitigate it with another card that hasn't changed hardly at all, is Crop Insurance. So I could say, screw you, I'm not taking that pesticides. I'm going to put Crop Insurance, which makes it 6 bucks to me if it dies or is stolen, and I'll do a Thresher. So I clear this off, and I get the 6 bucks. So nice little combo there. There's a lot of these now in the game where you could basically turn a bad situation into a good situation if you manage your cards and think about how to go through it. So finally, a card that basically hasn't changed except I cleaned it up is Foreclosure, which is that you pay any 2 crop cards. Previously this was like dynamic based on the value of the crop. Now it's just you pay 2 crop cards. So I would give the person I'm stealing from like, hey, take these 2 sassy wheat. I then steal this. The cool thing is that because it wasn't planted this turn, I could then fertilize it and harvest it. And you're thinking, stealing, that sounds stinky. Well, the thing is, it cost me a lot of cards to do that. I had to pay an action. I had to pay a lot of crop cards that I gave the person. So it's sort of like an immediate gain for the fact that I really slowed myself down. And you're going to see that a lot in this game, where the really powerful stuff will eat up your crop cards. It'll eat up your farmer cards. So if you run out of gas, you won't be able to do much, and then the rest of your opponents will go past you. So it's not just a cheap take that. There's a lot of thinking in how you play your cards. This video is running a little bit long, and I don't want to go through each of these like I did for the farmer cards, but there's also 11 unique Frankencrops. There's 2 of each. Something else that changed with the game is that previously there were the 60 plain crops that didn't have any special powers, and then there were 1 of each Frankencrop, so 70 cards total. Now there's 40 plain cards, and then there's 20 Frankencrops. Still the same 10 crops. All of them have been changed though, but now there's 2 of each. So there's 60 cards flat in the deck with a lot more variety. And these do some simple things like give you bonus crop cards, give you bonus action cards. You can break the harvest on the turn you plant it rule, and that combos nicely with a lot of things. There's a few cards where if you give somebody something, you can get cards in return. Riled Rice gives you double fertilizer. Flame Fruit lets you just outright destroy something. So these combo really nicely with all the other cards, and it adds a lot of diversity to the game. It's a lot of fun, and basically every turn you draw crop cards, every turn you end with new farmer cards, so you always have something cool to do on your turn. So it's really about how can you maximize what you're trying to do on your turn. So that's a quick look at Farmageddon Farm Fresh. It's very near final. We're tweaking the final wording on just a few of the cards. The graphic design is being finalized in the next couple weeks. We want to send this to print sometime this spring. So if you're interested in the PNP, I'll link it on the video, and we'd love to hear any of your thoughts on it. So thanks a lot for checking it out.